Getting frozen is one of the most infuriating things in Pokemon. Since the very beginning, the series has featured 5 primary status conditions: burn, poison, paralysis, sleep, and freeze. They've all been modified over the years, but one thing has remained consistent. Freeze has always been the most broken status, although sleep has given it a run for its money at several points. But for today, let's take a look at getting frozen over the years. Freeze was easily the most unfair in Generation 1. Predictably, the only moves that can freeze you in these games are Ice-type ones, namely Blizzard, Ice Punch, and Ice Beam. Blizzard was absolutely busted back in Gen 1. Nowadays, it's 110 power, 70 accuracy, and it has a 10% chance to freeze. But in Gen 1, it was 120 power and 90 accuracy. But wait, there's more. In the Japanese versions of Gen 1, Blizzard also has a 30% chance to freeze. And that's especially insane because in the first generation, getting frozen means you just perish. You'll never defrost naturally. You can only thaw out if your opponent uses specific moves, namely Haze or any fire-type move that can burn you. So if you get frozen, you're just out of luck. You lose that Pokemon for the rest of the battle, and you just have to deal with it. Freeze being permanent makes Ice Beam and Blizzard incredible moves competitively. Flippin' Tauros runs Blizzard, and it's a physical attacker. The threat of being frozen is so prevalent, people will often try to get their Pokemon paralyzed on purpose, to ensure they won't be deleted from the game by a freeze later. Getting frozen is so broken, battle simulators modify the game's mechanics to prevent it from becoming overwhelming. Pokemon Showdown has a Freeze Claws mod, which prevents 2 Pokemon on the same team from being frozen at the same time. This is something you can't do on a cartridge. There's no way to stop a second Pokemon from getting frozen. Do you know how broken something has to be in Generation 1 for the community to decide, yeah, no, we're not dealing with this? In a game where Sleep lasted 1 trillion turns, the Psychic type was way more powerful than intended, and perfectly accurate moves can miss because the game's code was handwritten on construction paper by 8-year-olds, freeze mechanics are one of the few things they changed for battle simulators. So much nonsense has been left intact, so that should go to show you how awful freeze really was back then. There was also a similar mod that prevented you from putting 2 of your opponent's Pokemon to sleep as well. On top of all of that, the freeze mechanics in Gen 1 mean it's possible to force an infinite battle. Let's say both players are down to their last 2 Pokemon, and each side has one that's frozen. If the 2 non-frozen Pokemon faint at the same time due to self-destruct, explosion, or recoil damage, then both frozen Pokemon will have to enter the battle, and neither of them can move until
the end of time.
Generation 2 nerfed Freeze, but not by much. They basically just found a way to remove infinite battles and called it a day. You know how Sleep and Confusion will last up to a certain number of turns then be removed? Yeah, they didn't do that. If a Pokemon is frozen, they have a 10% chance of defrosting every turn. So on average, you'll be frozen for 6.5 turns. Confusion lasts a maximum of 4 turns, and even Sleep lasts up to 6 turns in Gen 2. And there's still no hard limit on how many turns you can be frozen, so you could theoretically sit there for 100,000 years and still not be able to move. The only saving grace is you can't be frozen if Harsh Sunlight is active. So your only insurance policies against getting frozen are using your own ice types, since they're immune to most forms of freezing, and freaking Sunny Day. That's not exactly a great policy. Freeze was nerfed again in Generation 3, and now the chance to defrost each turn is 20%. So now on average you'll stay frozen for about 3 turns. At the end of the day though, Freeze still has the same fundamental problem as it did in Gen 2. There's no guarantee you'll ever thaw out. If you fall asleep, you know there's a hard maximum for how long it can last. Nowadays, sleep lasts 3 turns, so I can make decisions knowing I'm gonna wake up eventually. Same with Confusion. If it lasts 4 turns, I know I'm gonna snap out of it on turn 5, but you can't say the same thing about Freeze. For more videos like this, consider subscribing to Me Plays Games. I swear, I'm not just a salty old man yelling at a cloud in most of them. Despite being utterly ridiculous, Freeze remained virtually untouched for the next 4.5 generations. There was one minor change in Gen 6, but that's it. Now the water-type move Scald can thaw a frozen target. Whoop-de-doo! While Freeze stayed virtually the same, nearly every other status condition has been tweaked. The speed trap from Paralysis was changed from 75% to 50%, burn damage was reduced from 1/8 to 1/16 your max health, and the turn limit on Sleep was lowered. And it's not like Game Freak just doesn't know that Freeze is overpowered. Every other status has a move that will always cause it if it hits. To paralyze your target, you could use Thunder Wave or Glare, Burn has Will-O-Wisp, Poison and Sleep both have about 1,000,000 moves each, but there are no moves that'll always freeze you. The best you can do is a 10% chance with various Ice-type moves, or Galarian Articuno's Freezing Glare. Game Freak is well aware how stupid getting frozen can be, but they insist on keeping it anyway. Pokemon Legends Arceus overhauled a metric ton of mechanics, and one of the major ones was a reworking of the status conditions. Sleep was replaced with Drowsiness, and Freeze got replaced with Frostbite. Any move with a freeze chance before has a Frostbite chance in this game. I personally thought Frostbite was a great mechanic, because it was especially special equivalent of Burn. A Burn Pokemon takes a little damage at the end of each turn, and their physical attacks are half as strong. A Frostbitten Pokemon works the same way, but their special moves are weakened instead. Here on Me Plays Games, I've talked quite a bit about how much better special attackers are than physical ones, and adding Frostbite would help to fix that. Before Frostbite, special attackers never had to worry about their attacks being weakened with a status. But this new status gave us hope that Scarlet and Violet Oh, what do you mean they went right back to Freeze in Gen 9? Come on, man, you almost had it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Game Freak realized that Freeze and Sleep were broken, so they tried some alternatives in Legends Arceus, and I think they did a good job. And then they decided if it ain't broke, break it? Of course, one problem with nerfing Freeze is that the Ice type is pretty terrible already. Wolfie VGC, JPR, and Cammy Meal T have all made videos about how bad it is, so I won't go too in-depth for today. Frostbite is debilitating for special attackers, yeah, but Freeze is about 1,000,000 times more debilitating for everything. Yeah, Frostbitten Pokemon are weaker than they were before, but at least they can still attack. I think replacing Freeze with Frostbite would be fine anyway. What the Ice type really needs is some defensive help. Ice type Pokemon only have one resistance: Ice. Every type except itself deals neutral damage or better. And yet they keep making defensive Ice-type Pokemon for some godforsaken reason. The Archetype just doesn't work, because the primarily offensive Ice typing clashes with primarily defensive stat spreads. Ideally, defensive Pokemon can actually, you know, resist some moves, but we're getting a little bit off track here. My point is, even though Freeze is broken, it's not what Ice types need to be viable. Fishing for Freezes is an inconsistent strategy, and Game Freak would be better off giving them help in other areas. Getting frozen sucks when you're on the receiving end of it, but it's also a really lame and unsatisfying way to win a game. A few months ago, I played a random battle on Pokemon Showdown, and one of the Pokemon I got was a freeze-dry Glaceon. I somehow froze 3 of my opponent's Pokemon on my first try, and they just forfeit. Getting frozen is a frustrating way to lose, and it's a hollow way to win. It's just not fun on either end if you ask me. And like I said, Game Freak has already figured out a solution. Frostbite is miles more balanced than Freeze, and I think it's a real shame they threw it out when Gen 9 came around. So we don't get Frostbite, and we also don't get a hard turn limit like Sleep has. There's a bunch of ways to make Freeze more balanced, so it's frustrating that Game Freak decided to do none of them. Welp, that's all I got for today. Leave a comment with any other ideas you have to fix Freeze. I'll see you all next time. Good night, fellas. Sleep well.